If there is one absolute undeniable truth that has emerged from the smoke and fire of the war in Ukraine, it is that the very nature of modern combat has been fundamentally and permanently rewritten. We are witnessing a historic paradigm shift, a masterclass in asymmetric warfare that military academies in the United States and around the globe will be studying for the next century. Imagine for a moment the sheer audacity of the situation. A nation with practically no conventional navy to speak of, a country whose fleet consists of little more than a handful of patrol boats and mine warfare vessels, has systematically dismantled, humiliated, and decimated one of the most historically feared naval forces on the face of the earth. The Russian Black Sea Fleet, the pride of Vladimir Putin's military machine, the juggernaut that was supposed to strangle Ukraine into submission, has been reduced to a terrified flock of sitting ducks hiding in ports, desperately scanning the dark horizons for a threat they cannot hear, cannot catch, and cannot stop. What is happening right now in the freezing, turbulent waters of the Black Sea is nothing short of a revolution. Ukraine has proven that it possesses a ruthless, unyielding patience, combined with a devastating capacity to strike vulnerable targets over and over again until the Russian military is bled completely dry of its assets. And right now, there is no target on the map more vulnerable and more vital than the port of Novorossiysk. This is a port that was supposed to be a safe haven. After 4 years of staggering, humiliating failures, after being chased out of the annexed Crimean Peninsula and driven from their historic stronghold in Sevastopol, the Russian Naval Command pulled their surviving ships back to Novorossiysk. They thought distance would protect them. They thought the umbrella of their vaunted air defenses would keep them safe. They were dead wrong. About a month ago, Novorossiysk was the victim of a devastating Ukrainian strike. But the Ukrainian military does not rest on its laurels. Today, that key Black Sea port is once again engulfed in a massive, towering fireball, a beacon of Russian failure burning so brightly it can be seen from low Earth orbit. But this is not just about blowing up concrete piers or setting fuel on fire. This is about systematically hunting down the most dangerous weapons of war Russia has left in its arsenal. Let us talk about the frigates. Let us talk about the floating fortresses that have rained terror upon Ukrainian cities. On April 6, the head of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy, stepped into the public eye to announce a strike that sent shockwaves all the way to the halls of the Kremlin. It was an operation of breathtaking complexity, coordinated flawlessly between the First Center of Unmanned Systems Forces and the Security Service of Ukraine. The target was the Black Sea Fleet. The weapon of choice was not a multi-million-dollar hypersonic missile. It was a swarm of explosive-laden drones, piloted by men and women staring at screens miles away. Brovdy, waxing poetic about the lethal precision of his operators, declared that while Russian missiles often fly blindly into nothingness, Ukrainian drones find their mark every single time. And find their mark they did. They did not just hit any ship, they hit the Admiral Makarov. To understand the magnitude of this strike, you have to understand what the Admiral Makarov represents. This is not a simple patrol boat. This is one of only 3 Project 11 356R Berezhnik class frigates that Russia has managed to build. It is a technological centerpiece of their naval strategy. But more importantly, it was one of the very few warships left in the entire Black Sea Fleet capable of launching the devastating Caliber cruise missiles. If you want to know why Ukrainian cities have suffered, if you want to know what destroys apartment buildings and power grids in the dead of night, it is the Caliber. These are terrain-hugging, supersonic nightmares that carry a 992-pound warhead. They can travel over 1,550 miles. That means the Admiral Makarov could sit comfortably in the supposed safety of Novorossiysk, brew a pot of coffee, press a button, and strike almost any target within the sovereign borders of Ukraine. Stopping a Caliber once it is in the air is incredibly difficult. So the Ukrainian military, utilizing a brilliant, ruthless logic, decided that the best way to stop the missile is to kill the archer before he can even draw his bow. Removing the Caliber missiles from the equation of this war is paramount. And Ukraine just delivered a lethal blow to that capability. Defense intelligence reports indicate that the Admiral Makarov was the last fully operational warship in the entire Black Sea capable of firing these cruise missiles. Let that sink in. A nation without a navy has systematically hunted down and neutralized the missile carriers of a global superpower. Putin relied heavily on these ships to maintain an aerial campaign of terror, a campaign that saw Russia launch 138 missiles against Ukraine in March alone. Yet, amazingly, that heavy volume was actually a 52% decrease from the previous month. The Russian war machine is running out of breath. It is running out of ammunition, and now, thanks to Ukrainian drone operators, it is running out of the very ships required to launch whatever they have left. The footage that has emerged from the strike on the Admiral Makarov is the stuff of naval nightmares. It is a terrifying, intimate glimpse into the future of warfare. In a 2-minute video released by the Ukrainian military, we see the perspective of the drone flying low, skipping just above the cresting waves of the Dark Sea, closing the distance with terrifying speed. We see the towering steel hull of the Russian frigate looming larger and larger in the frame, and then we see the panic. The video captures the Admiral Makarov desperately firing off its air defense missiles. We see streaks of fire launching directly from the side of the frigate. These are multi-million-dollar defense systems designed to protect the ship against state-of-the-art Western weaponry, and they fail completely. The missiles fly blindly into the night sky, coming nowhere even remotely close to the incoming Ukrainian drones. The Russian sailors, realizing their multi-million-dollar shield is useless against a cheap buzzing piece of plastic and explosive, can do nothing but brace for impact. The drone slams into the ship, pecking at what the Ukrainians mockingly call the floating scab. The floating scab. It is a derogatory, dismissive term, but it is 100% accurate. The Black Sea Fleet has become a festering wound on the Russian military, an embarrassment that simply will not heal. The drones Ukraine used to inflict this wound are marvels of modern improvised engineering. While the exact model is kept under a shroud of operational secrecy, military analysts point heavily to the FP1. The sheer logistics of this strike are mind-bending. Novorossiysk is incredibly far from Ukrainian-held territory. To reach it, a drone must be capable of traveling nearly 1,000 miles, navigating through contested airspace, avoiding radar detection, and maintaining a connection to its operator. The FP1 can do exactly that, all while carrying a payload of over 260 pounds of high explosives. Imagine the terror of the Russian Admiralty, realizing that a weapon costing a fraction of a percent of a warship's value can fly 1,000 miles and rip the steel hull of a frigate wide open. If targeted perfectly, that amount of concentrated firepower is more than enough to take the Admiral Makarov entirely out of commission, permanently blinding Russia's cruise missile capabilities in the region. Let us take a step back and look at the brutal reality of the Black Sea. When Vladimir Putin launched this unprovoked invasion, the Black Sea Fleet was supposed to be his ace in the hole. It was the ultimate trump card. The Pentagon, NATO, and military experts worldwide looked at the balance of power and assumed Ukraine's coastal waters belonged to Moscow. The plan was terrifyingly simple. The Russian fleet would position itself off the coast of Odessa and Mykolaiv. They would bombard the mainland at will. They would enforce an ironclad blockade, stopping all of Ukraine's vital grain exports dead in their tracks, starving the global south while simultaneously depriving Kiev of the billions of dollars required to fund their defense. And ultimately, they would establish safe passage to launch massive amphibious assaults, landing thousands of Russian Marines onto the Ukrainian mainland from the annexed fortress of Crimea. That was the plan. But no plan survives contact with a highly motivated, highly innovative enemy fighting for its very existence. Over 4 years into this grueling conflict, Russia is as far away from dominating the Black Sea as a military can possibly be. Ukraine did not surrender the sea. Instead, they adapted, they innovated, they combined the lethal precision of Western anti-ship missiles with a rapidly evolving, entirely homegrown fleet of unmanned maritime and aerial drones. They turned the Black Sea into a kill zone. Well over a third of the entire Russian Black Sea fleet currently sits at the bottom of the ocean or rests as burnt-out husks in dry docks. The Moskva, the flagship, a guided missile cruiser, is a submarine. Landing ships have been vaporized. Submarines have been struck while in port. And now the Admiral Makarov joins the long, bloody list of casualties. The impact of the Russian fleet on Ukraine's agricultural exports is now entirely negligible. Ukraine literally forced the Russian Navy to retreat, opening its own secure shipping lanes, defying the blockade, and securing its economic lifeline. The Russian fleet has been downgraded from a strategic juggernaut to a complete non-factor, an absolute embarrassment that must hide behind concrete barriers, praying that the buzzing sound of a Ukrainian drone doesn't find them in the dark. But taking out frigates and neutralizing cruise missiles is only half of the story. While the Admiral Makarov burns in its berth, the situation in the Black Sea has escalated into a completely new dimension of warfare. The Ukrainian military is not just playing defense, they are playing a hyper-aggressive game of three-dimensional chess, and they are targeting the very eyes and ears of the Russian military. Before Robert Brovdy signed off on his April 6th announcement, he detailed a secondary strike that is just as devastating, if not more so, to Russia's broader strategic posture. Far off the coast, isolated in the turbulent waters of the Black Sea, sits the Sivash self-elevating oil drilling platform. But this is not an oil rig anymore. The Russian military, in an act of desperate improvisation, hijacked the Savash platform and transformed it into a heavily militarized forward operating base. They turned it into a crucial node in their air defense network, bolting massive, sophisticated radar systems to the drilling decks. These radars were designed to look deep into Ukrainian airspace, to track incoming missiles, and to provide early warning to the fleet hiding in Novorossiysk. Taking down those radars is vital, and the way Ukraine did it belongs in a science fiction novel. The Ukrainian Navy, utilizing those small patrol boats that the Russian fleet was supposed to have destroyed years ago, pushed out into the Black Sea. But they were not alone. The video footage released by Kyiv Post reveals a tactic of unbelievable ingenuity. The video switches perspective. We are no longer looking at the towering hull of a frigate. We are looking at the steel beams and industrial walkways of an oil rig, but we are looking at it through the camera of a small, highly maneuverable FPV drone. FPV drones, the small racing-style quadcopters favored by infantry, do not have the battery life to fly hundreds of miles out into the ocean. So how did they get there? The answer is the mothership. Back in February, intelligence reports surfaced that Ukraine had developed a revolutionary new concept. They took their stealthy, low-profile, uncrewed surface vessels, the explosive sea drones that had already wreaked havoc on Russian ships, and repurposed them. Instead of carrying a massive explosive charge, these sea drones became robotic aircraft carriers. The sea drone silently navigates the massive distances across the Black Sea, undetected by radar, blending into the waves. Once it reaches striking distance of the Savash platform, the sea drone opens up and launches the FPV aerial drones directly into the air. The Russian radar operators on the rig would never see it coming. They are looking for fighter jets and massive cruise missiles, not tiny plastic drones popping up from the water just a few hundred yards away. The footage shows these drones weaving through the steel structure of the rig, finding the multi-million-dollar radar dishes and detonating directly against them. Boom, 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 multiple primary and secondary strikes. In a matter of minutes, Ukraine violently poked out the eyes of the Russian military in that sector of the Black Sea. By blinding the Savash platform, Ukraine has ripped open a massive, undefended aerial corridor. It is a highway through the sky, totally devoid of early warning radar, a highway that almost guarantees a relentless wave of even deeper, more devastating Ukrainian strikes in the very near future. But if you think that the destruction of a missile-carrying frigate and the blinding of an offshore radar base is the extent of Ukraine's recent operations, you are vastly underestimating the scope of their strategy. Behind the military strikes, behind the smoke of the warships, Ukraine has initiated a massive, calculated, and crippling campaign against the very lifeblood of the Russian Federation. They are going after the oil, they are going after the money, and they are striking with a ferocity that is sending sheer panic through the global energy markets and the halls of the Kremlin. You cannot fight a war without money, and Vladimir Putin's war machine is funded almost entirely by the export of fossil fuels. Ukraine has realized that to stop the tanks on the front lines, you do not just shoot at the tanks, you blow up the bank that pays for the fuel inside them. This brings us back to the sprawling industrial expanse of Novorossiysk, specifically the Sheskharis oil terminal. On top of everything else, Ukraine unleashed a massive apocalyptic strike against this specific terminal. They took out two of the port's massive main piers. They struck the highly pressurized pipeline control nodes. The resulting explosions triggered fires of such immense magnitude, burning with such intense thermal energy, that infrared satellites orbiting the planet picked up the heat signatures. The sky turned black with ash, and the most critical outcome was achieved instantly. The loading of crude oil at this port came to an absolute grinding halt. Vladimir Putin is frankly getting used to his military bases blowing up. He is getting used to the embarrassing sight of drone debris raining down on his cities. But what he cannot get used to, what truly terrifies him and his inner circle of oligarchs, is the destruction of his cash flow. The Sheskharis terminal is not a minor facility, it is a beating heart of the Russian economy. According to detailed energy reporting, this single terminal handles anywhere between 25 and 35% of all of Russia's crude oil exports. It is the exit point for the massive reserves pumped from the Urals, from the frozen expanse of Siberia, and from pipelines stretching into Kazakhstan. When operating at peak peacetime capacity, Sheskharis processes an astonishing 3 to 3.2 million tons of oil every single month. Even with the wartime sanctions and the logistical nightmares of the current conflict, this terminal accounted for roughly 20% of Russia's total crude exports. To understand the absolute devastation this strike has caused, you have to do the math. You have to look at the sheer overwhelming volume of wealth that Ukraine just set on fire. Let us use that baseline of 3 million tons of crude per month. According to the Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, 1 metric ton of foreign crude oil translates to roughly 6.99 barrels. On April 2nd, the price of Russia's flagship Urals crude hit a massive high of $116.05 per barrel. So take that 3 million tons, multiply it by 6.99 barrels. That is nearly 21 million barrels of crude oil flowing through Sheskharis every 30 days. Multiply that by $116 a barrel and you are looking at over $2.4 billion. $2.4 billion every single month. That is the cost of thousands of tanks. That is the salaries of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. That is the money Putin desperately needs to keep his failing invasion alive. And right now, that facility is shut down, crippled, and burning, all because a swarm of Ukrainian drones slipped through the night sky and delivered pinpoint, catastrophic hits. This was not a lucky shot. This was the single most ambitious, coordinated strike Ukraine has ever conducted against the port of Novorossiysk. Intelligence reports indicate that Ukraine unleashed a massive swarm of approximately 50 drones simultaneously. You do not commit 50 long-range drones to a single target unless you intend to wipe it off the map. By launching a swarm of that size, Ukraine saturated the Russian air defenses. They overwhelmed the tracking systems. Even if the Russians shot down 40 of them, the remaining 10 would slip through, and 10 200-pound warheads detonating inside a pressurized oil refinery is a recipe for absolute disaster. The fires burning so brightly they are seen from space are the irrefutable evidence that Ukraine succeeded. And here is the most terrifying part for the Kremlin. This was the 4th time Ukraine has hit this specific facility in less than 6 months. The Russian military is entirely incapable of defending its most valuable economic asset. The most recent strike before this one happened on March 2nd. That attack was surgically precise, taking out 6 of the 7 massive oil-filling loading arms at the terminal, forcing a total shutdown of the port. The message is clear, relentless, and brutal. Ukraine will not stop. They will strike, and restrike, and strike again until the pipes run dry and the loading docks are reduced to twisted, melted slag. But Ukraine's economic warfare is not confined to the Black Sea. The Ukrainian High Command has opened a second, equally devastating front in the north. They have taken the war to the Baltic Sea. Over the last several weeks, Ukraine has rattled off strike after catastrophic strike against the massive Russian oil export terminals at Primorsk and Ust-Luga. These ports are the gateway to Europe. Combined, the Baltic Sea ports account for a staggering 40% of Russia's total oil exporting capacity. We are talking about 2 million barrels of oil every single day, 60 million barrels a month. And right now, massive portions of that capacity are offline. The terminals are burning. Emergency repair crews are working around the clock just to keep the infrastructure from entirely collapsing. The fires at Ust-Luga were so colossal, so fiercely out of control, that the glow in the night sky was visible across the Gulf of Finland. The cascading effects of these strikes are causing a monumental logistical nightmare for Russia. Because the terminals are damaged and loading operations are halted, the oil tankers have nowhere to go. Back in late March, maritime tracking data showed a massive logjam of over 50 massive commercial vessels stranded in the Gulf of Finland. They were anchored, waiting, burning fuel, and losing money, all because Ukrainian drones had turned their destination into an inferno, and both Primorsk and Ust-Luga have been hit again since then. Ukraine is tightening the noose. They are not letting up on their primary objective, to utterly prevent Vladimir Putin from turning fossil fuels into artillery shells. The financial bleeding is catastrophic. Before these latest strikes even occurred, independent financial analysts estimated that Ukraine's relentless targeting of Russian oil infrastructure had already vaporized nearly $1 billion in expected oil windfalls. Russia thought they were going to cash in on global supply shortages caused by tensions in the Middle East. Instead, they lost $970 million in revenue before March was even over. The strategy is brilliant in its brutal simplicity. Russia's oil is going to burn. It is either going to burn in the engines of Russian tanks rolling across Ukrainian soil, or it is going to burn in massive storage tanks in the Baltic and Black Seas. Ukraine has decided it will be the latter. This campaign of economic destruction means that billions upon billions of dollars are vanishing from a Russian war chest that is already looking dangerously empty. The cost of this war has been astronomical. The loss of equipment, the sanctions, the brain drain, and the massive logistical failures have forced Putin into a corner. He is now reportedly resorting to begging for scraps, squeezing the Russian oligarchs, demanding they open their private vaults to keep the military-industrial complex running. This is the entire point of the Deep Strike campaign. Taking out the Admiral Makarov, sinking the frigates, and destroying the radar platforms on the Savage rig are vital military operations that save Ukrainian lives. They neutralize immediate threats, but the terminal strikes, the fires in Novorossiysk and Ust-Luga, that is where Ukraine is severing the jugular vein of the Russian state. Every single dollar that Russia loses right now, at a time when global oil prices are highly lucrative, is a dollar that cannot buy a microchip for a missile. It is a dollar that cannot pay a mercenary. It is a dollar that cannot replace a destroyed tank. As Putin's cash reserves run dry, the sheer weight of the Russian war machine will cause it to crack and crumble. The logistics will fail. The supply lines will freeze. And as that happens, the pressure on the heavily fortified front lines will lift, allowing Ukrainian ground forces the breathing room they desperately need to maneuver and counterattack. Putin cannot even take comfort in the illusion that the worst is behind him. The skies over Russia are no longer safe. The waters of the Black Sea are a graveyard. By taking out the radar platforms, Ukraine has ensured that the next wave of drones will have an even easier time penetrating Russian airspace. The corridors are open. The coordinates are locked. Sheskharis is burning again. The Admiral Makarov is disabled. And sooner or later, a profound psychological breaking point will be reached. If Vladimir Putin refuses to accept that his ports are indefensible, the global shipping industry will make that decision for him. The international conglomerates that own the massive oil tankers, the insurance companies in London and New York that underwrite these voyages, are watching the skies over the Black and Baltic Seas. They are seeing the satellite imagery of burning piers and shattered loading docks. Commercial captains have absolutely no desire to navigate their highly explosive cargo into an active war zone where 50 drones might descend from the clouds at any moment. They do not want to be blown to pieces for Russian profit. And as Ukraine makes a daily habit of dismantling Russian port infrastructure, the risk premiums will skyrocket. The tankers will refuse to dock. The flow of oil will stop not just because the pipes are broken, but because no one is willing to park their ship underneath a falling bomb. This is the reality of the war right now. It is a reality defined by Ukrainian ingenuity and Russian vulnerability. It is a story of explosive sea drones acting as aircraft carriers, of massive swarms of flying bombs traveling thousands of miles to hit a pipeline with the precision of a sniper rifle. It is the story of a nation defending its right to exist by systematically dismantling the military and economic foundations of its invader. The Black Sea Fleet is crippled. The oil terminals are burning. The radar screens are static. And in the dark waters and the night skies, the Ukrainian drones are already calculating their next target. This is not just a defense. This is a systematic dismantling of a superpower. And the world is watching in awe as the fires burn brighter by the day.